So I think, Tabitha and I have been Tabitha and I have been working together for almost a year now in a bunch of different things. And when we started talking about the summit, we started getting into, what are the really cool things that we've been kind of doing together over the last year? What have we learned? What are some of the things that she's seen over the past? How is social really changing? We're really lucky with you coming from the brand marketing side, coming over to SOCOM, and really kind of getting to get on that other side of things and see how things are emerging and changing over a few. We were talking yesterday about how things have changed so much since 2007. Get to play a little bit of, wow, it really has been the Wild West so far, and how things have changed. But I want to go in just a little bit, make sure we set the stage for what this is all about. So today we're going to talk about building social communities in the video game industry. I want to cover some things though, don't want anybody to get confused, kind of last couple panels, you guys are really deep in. We're not going to do this. This is not going to happen today. I had a hard time even looking at this. The word social media is in there. Don't get scared. Everything will be okay. It's been around for a long time. Everybody's talking about different things. Also, as much as we'd like to, Tabitha's boss is here today, so we were going to give away some secrets, but she kind of showed, we called the cab. So no double top secrets today.
Yeah, no secrets.
Oh, she's sitting right in front.
I know.
How'd she get that? Also, none of this. Not going to run through 90 steps to Nirvana and how we make things happen. I wanted to make sure that we are clear that this is not the kind of thing. Rebecca's group maybe is going to get into some eye charts. We'll see what they do. You might want to get one more drink before that happens. It always helps out with analytics. I see them closer. Now, so what we're going to do though today is Tabitha and I want to go and just chat a little bit about kind of how communities come together. The really fun thing about community that I always see is that I talk to a lot of my friends are on the community side in so many other industries. And the problem is that like the guys who I know that work at Edelman and this kind of thing, they don't deal with F-bombs. They don't deal with cursing and sarcasm and porn and all the really great things that we get to deal with every single day. It makes
servers down. Yeah.
So what we do get to deal with though is something a little more like this. It's funny how many of these pictures kind of reflect different people that you and I both have on our various teams. I think I can find Drew in here, and I can find Ian in here, and I can find Jack and Corey a little bit. They're little views of themselves. So, yesterday you and I were talking a little bit about, as goofy as these guys are, how different, you and I both had social media teams, 2007, 2008, when really this was starting, and how different kind of that was 4 or 5 years ago when we were trying to figure this out, and those early days of what we kind of got handed to work with.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like the old stereotype about who our gamers are, right? They're in a cave, and so then the community team was in a cave, and so we kind of operated that way. I think that's a really outdated stereotype. One of the things we were talking about yesterday is, and I think Leo mentioned performance marketing. Our community teams are performance marketers, and so we've really changed kind of the paradigm about how we think about community. And that means we've changed who's on our team and what kind of skill sets they have. So it's a big shift from 5 years ago when we had guys in a cave. I'm like, yeah, they'll work. They know how to talk about core gaming stuff, and they play these core games. And now it's a very different skill set and really different area of focus.
It seemed to be in those days you either got the forum moderators who really were those stereotypical guys that lived in their mom's basement, or they came right out of customer service, and they knew how to deal with things like credit card problems and basic customer service issues, but it wasn't marketing. It seems like today I don't know anybody on your team or my team or any of the groups that we work with. I'm amazed that these guys are way smarter than I am. Degrees in sociology and psychology and communications, and I think half the people on my team are working on their master's degree in something. And it's amazing. And yet, these are the most hardcore gamers that I have ever seen in my entire life. It's amazing the mix of people, and they talk about the hundreds of hours they have in a particular game. I think one of the girls that we have right now, was talking about she has 127 hours playing Mass Effect 2. And the fact that she knew that how many hours that she played through that game and the variations and.
But I think what's also interesting about that is something I was talking to Ian about is she's responding within the community from a point of understanding the games, right? It's having that deep understanding and knowledge and intimacy.
That authenticity.
It's so authentic and it's super credible, and it makes the community want to engage even more with her. And so I think that's really where we start to see ourselves fine-tuning as we go, and why the gameplay is so important still, but the way we frame it and the types of people who are really managing these communities is different.
And it seems like the sophistication level, the layers that I think that we've all figured out, from the how to work out, brand relevant, publisher and developer approved messaging, that we need to put out information that's important, yet have people that are smart enough, like Amanda, that understand the game to a point that where she takes the authorized messaging and uses it and weaves it into the story of the game in a way that the community never calls bullshit on it.
Right.
Where so often I think you and I have both seen in other lives where the community almost flares up. There's this fear of putting moderators on the ground, because the community immediately starts jumping up going, you're cutting and pasting things, is this a bot? I think just that quality and that the maturity of the social media community teams that we've built have started changing to where they're both deeply involved in the game and really understand the performance marketing and the brand responsibility side. And it's a decision they have to make because they have the hand on the keyboard. It's really amazing to see how much that's changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a shift for EA as well, right? So we're not Big Brother, and we're not, just seeing if there's any urgent fires or something, right? It's really about building a relationship, be human first, is a big area of focus for us, and really building and nurturing those relationships. But not just to have 10 people, and 10 men or 8 hours a day, just talking, but also put the performance behind it. What are the objectives? What are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to convert customers here? Are we engaging? Are we building awareness? Like, what are we trying to do? And really being thoughtful and mindful about it. And again, we fine-tune it every single day, right? So it's not something you just, EA has a new strategy, or Games Label has a new strategy, or Eisenberg has a new strategy, but every day, how are we fine-tuning it? How are we working with each other to make sure that we're optimizing?
In that combination, I think we'll get more into it of the, here's the analytics of it. They're reporting up, how many instances we see of this and what's trending and what's the real analytics percentage number. And then also there's always that one piece that's we get the insight from each one of the individuals, 7 or 8 people that are on any particular shift, to make sure to go and get kind of that purview from them as well. So it's like, here's all the data, and here's then kind of there's a human opinion from just the one person who is, behind the keyboard, and it really seems to, it evens that out a little bit from is this a really small minority squeaky wheel, the data shows this, but then also what's the feel of it, so it's really cool.
Yep, we get a lot of those late night weekend executives saying, hey, there's this thing that I saw, and then when we're able to actually look at the data, we can see that thing was 2 people just talking really loudly about that one thing, and it's much easier to remedy or put that out. Also, when you understand the scale, you can coach everyone else in the organization. So there's been a lot of good kind of training, not just our team to think differently, but our whole organization to think differently about what community is and how we engage with them.
And I think it's one of the areas where having the dedicated team on it has changed, where I think previously, in kind of the old school way of video game social moderation, where you were using the one community manager, or maybe you had the 1 or 2 forum moderators who'd also jump over. You could only have so much time on the keyboard, and you certainly then didn't have a time to regularly generate real analytics reports, kind of like we do now, looking at like you said, that it's that constant live input of trying to bubble up the most important pieces, where before it seemed like, wow, this problem has become huge. That's all I'm hearing about.
Yeah, the analytics and the human allow us to make the trade-offs, right, that we need to make, because we don't have infinite dollars and time and people. And so, it just helps us keep our pulse on what really are the priorities and what's important. And then, you think about your mix, how much time you're spending, different channels. We're going to talk about channel presence, what's like next. So how much time we're investing in each channel, what we're trying to do in each channel. So it's really important if we don't have that analytical foundation, and then also the people piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I found this, it's kind of the trick with the presentations is always trying to find a couple graphics that are somewhat interesting and, either find quotes from somebody or things that represent what you're doing. And it was really cool. I actually hadn't heard this quote from Zuckerberg before. It says, communities already exist. Instead, think about how you can help that community do what it wants to do. And it's like I read it and I'm like, okay. Obviously, from the very beginning, rarely I think does the developer go and make a game just because it's something they want to build. They feel like they're building a game because
they don't
there's
do that?
Oh well, some
Sorry,
do.
a lapse of listening skills for a minute.
I'm sure there's some of that happening.
Yeah,
Hopefully, not
okay.
too many of those make it to the light of day. But but there's already an audience, and really an audience and a community is the same thing. It's funny, when I was going over the deck yesterday, somebody on the team asked, so is audience and community synonymous? And I'm like, well, I think from a social perspective, it is. If you're not going to, in theory, build a game that doesn't have an audience, and so even if it's, whether you have a Battlefield 3 that it's in its 9th, 10th, 11th, iteration, however many there have been since 1991 or whenever the first one came out, or Call of Duty and earlier in your career, or you're putting out a brand new IP, a game's been built because an audience exists, which means, in theory, a community exists. And so whether we're taking in Facebook being a new channel, I think we're starting to see this where, even in EA, who's been pretty well organized all along, nearly at the beginning of 2011 at least, and I'm still seeing, I think, this year, and I think all the other publishers and developers across the industry are going to start having this, is where they have these existing communities, but their channels, their Facebook pages and Twitter are minuscule still. They'll tell you how many millions of copies they sold, 2 years ago, last time the IP came out, or what they expect it to be. Yet there's 12,000 people in the channel, and that the tough part of building that up and coming up with a strategy that's a balance of how do we use those resources smartly. And how do you guys go about looking at some of this new stuff that you're doing and you're thinking about it? And I know part of our conversation always is talking about, okay, what content's going to get them involved? How can we use the viral nature of having people present on a channel? And we work through ebbs and flows as it's right, but what are you seeing as far as thinking goes? As how, a couple of years ago it was, we need 1 million likes. Right. Now we're trying to think a little bit more ahead of time and what's realistic. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, a couple thoughts come to mind. One, I think as an organization, we're doing a much better job as looking at what are the things that matter. So what are the key indicators of interest, and then of course to conversion. So we've got lots of really smart PhDs looking at a lot of data and a lot of insights in terms of what are those triggers that consumers respond to. That helps feed into the brand team as well in terms of what is the right positioning for this product. And of course the SOCOM team, so social, community, online marketing is our group. We're a part of that kind of chair as well, feeding back what is the community responding to. So I think early on we're helping to build what that plan might look like.
Sure.
How many likes do we need? And quite frankly, we could argue that likes aren't really even that important if we can't convert them to purchase.
Right.
But so what are some of those key metrics? And so we kind of work together as a group to really identify what are those key metrics, and then what are our targets, and then what are our plans we're going to put against those. So the investment is changing. So I think that's one of the key pieces probably for this group is just TV. Just lots of TV and building awareness, those days are changing. We still need TV, but we need other things too. And so I think that's where it's really, at least neat for me, to really partner closely with the analytics team. And of course, we do a lot of analytics, so everyone does analytics. But people who look at this day in and day out help understand what those key drivers are, and then our team, more real time, pulse every second of every day.
Right.
And then the brand marketers who are really kind of trying to shape the overall direction. So I think that's kind of the frame up of how we're thinking differently and how we're planning differently. Won't talk about the media mix, so to speak, but just know that that's changing as a result of that, of course. And then to your question about content, every piece of content we put out, we get a response to, right? So we can understand what's the sentiment of that, piece of content. What are the specifics of
Really
the
get
feedback?
we get to start using those principles of performance marketing on every
Absolutely.
piece of content we put out. Sure, the first one was our instant focus group,
Yes.
and everything after that,
Yes.
we now have data, and I think that's that misperception is always like, there's almost this PR, social media line that they're still kind of perceived that, oh, well, there's no data behind social, yet it's probably, I bet we spend as much time analyzing and tracking data so that way we make sure the next step that we do is really well informed.
Yeah, that's the foundation. So I think on a day-to-day basis, we're looking at data to help drive decisions. On a planning basis, we're
Right.
looking at data to help drive decisions. Being able to look and see how people are responding to pieces of content, even if, I mostly focus on HD console games that have worked in Play for Free and other areas, but it still impacts our messaging, so how we want to frame up the different communication points to the consumer. It impacts maybe PDLC, certainly our teams that work on Play for Free games, it impacts feature sets, right? So every piece of communication we put out, or whether it's a trailer or
Right.
it's a poll, right? It's talking about what we did over the weekend around cars, if we're Need for Speed, we get data back, right? And so the ability to look at that, mine it, that's part of the human piece, part of the analytics piece, and then roll that back into meaningful feedback. That could be for a point in time, for a next tactic.
Right.
It could also be for a product.
Absolutely, and I think now that we, like so with you and I, with our teams from this past fall, we've now gone through that cycle where you'll start looking at that next cycle and say, hey, what did we learn from this game? And we now have more data, socially than we've ever had before. That's, the biggest focus group any video game release has ever had, because the amount of data we're able to get and then feed that back into the core part of development, making sure that good games are made. Exactly, we hope so.
Yeah.
And to me that gets to our conversation, and it's funny, we just had this conversation with Kat a few weeks ago about when you start getting coordinated, then you start getting the benefit of the data I've collected, then starts rolling over, especially for a publisher, for an EA or an Activision or a Square, or Ubisoft, anybody who deals with multiple developers, being able to start going, I've collected this data about this game, and then here are all the other games that we as a group work on that have similar audiences and communities. What can we learn from this? It seems like the video game industry, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, really became very siloed, and everything became about a single game launch. It's almost like with social media growing and becoming more of a universal platform, it's like that coalition is coming back together, because now we have incredibly important data about this audience that can be very useful for a release of a completely different IP.
Yeah, I think everyone in our company benefits from being close to the consumer and the consumer insights. I know Alonso's here from our media planning team. And so we work really closely with the media planners, right, to better understand what are the right messages and the right channels. And I think Leo talked a little bit about retargeting and things like that, right? So that's really important to be closely aligned with your media planners, and what messages we're paying to put in front of consumers, and then what's resonating. We can, as a team, really kind of complete the circle in terms of those insights. So I think everyone, literally, I can't even, I'm just like, is it IT smart? Yep, IT smart. Like literally everyone, I think, is more empowered
Sure.
in the company because we've made these types of investments, and we're listening really closely to the consumers. And it's really not just about crisis management. In fact, crisis management is a teeny tiny piece of what we do
Absolutely.
On our communities. It's really about helping empower teams all over the company, whether it's a different developer or a different shooter developer. Let's show the shooter insights to literally every single.
Yeah, just because it's a different developer, from your guys' perspective, it's like, hey, we've learned something about our first-person shooter audience based on something as big as Battlefield, but there are certainly more than one shooter being developed a year by EA and everybody else, and that's a lot of great data that can be shared across about what are the current trends of this audience and how is it changing. So it's great to see. I think that's where a lot of folks have struggled recently, is sharing information outside. Everyone's starting to see that again, and it's nice to see social kind of bring the whole word. The word social means that it's supposed to be a little more, and yet everybody tried to make it very, very narrow for a little while. It was really exciting to see.
Yeah, and I think just the only other thought on the cross promo stuff, and it's funny because I just did something today in the office this morning before I left, but that idea of making sure the audience is going to benefit is
Right.
really important. And so a lot of times our partners around EA are like, hey, we got this game coming out. Can you talk about it in your channel? And I'm like, what's in it for the customer? So I think
Right.
that's part of also what's really important is just that part of being authentic is thinking, and being human is thinking about what's
to say authentic.
Yeah, what's in it for the customer, right? And because if we're not really treating them well and nurturing them, they'll leave. And we saw that. We did some cross promo. To our surprise and disappointment, we got totally hammered. Like people just like unlike. I mean, it was the highest unlike rate we had. And we're like, wait a second. They play these types of games. They also play these types of games. We thought we hadn't. So I think, but what the beauty is literally within one post, we could look, well, 2-day delay on Facebook data.
Right.
But so within 2 days, we could look and see was there a negative impact on the high rate.
They know the difference between marketing and
yes, and then we changed
social.
it. Yeah, and got rid of it. So I think that's also the good part is you can repair, or you can adjust, you can optimize really quickly.
It seems like, and it doesn't mean that they're not interested in the products part of it. But it's certainly when it comes to reviews about yourself and direct sales, the way you deliver that to the community really has to be well thought through. And certainly what works on one community doesn't work on another. They all have their very own, very distinct personalities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And I know one of the things that I think as we get better with every segment, building the foundations of social channels, probably the next level that I think everybody's working towards is working past the channels that we own and really starting to listen. And certainly we have our experts in Reddit and and things like that who are there. But I think just overall listening is getting better. Because some people, it seems like they avoid the official channel, but boy, they have a lot to say.
Yeah, they have a lot to say, and they're everywhere, right? So it's like we can't put them in a box and say you're only going to talk here. They're talking everywhere. So I think part of kind of seeing where everyone else is talking, one is are there any concerns, any hot buttons, are there any issues? But also, should we be somewhere? Are we listening in somewhere where we're not? And then can we find a relevant way to connect with those people? So I think when Chris was talking about this particular video, and it was YouTube influencers were part of it. So if somebody's having a great conversation about Battlefield somewhere, and we're not there, but we know about it, is there a way we can get there in a meaningful way?
Or at least encourage we've certainly seen great content coming from some of those communities, the creativity and the things that they can do that you just never have the budget to do. It's just impossible to create everything they'd want. And these guys are just amazingly impassioned and just spending a little time with them.
And that's and that's the thing. It doesn't even have to be anything other than saying, hey, we're here, is there anything you need? We love your work, whatever. Just to encourage them and keep them going. So I think that's a really important piece of community. Something that I know certainly our team loves doing is finding people who love talking about the game and really encouraging them.
To us, it's that difference between, it's almost like PR and a certain level of, the Kotakus and some of those are professional journalists that the PR guys deal with every day. And then a lot of these guys who make these amazing community pieces, they're almost like that, they're minor league baseball, they're minor league hockey, they're the guys that aren't getting paid, but are super passionate about it and just have this ability to carry a community to a whole nother level and figuring out ways to either, whether it's reward them or, like you said, sometimes it's just letting them know that you hear them is sometimes enough it'll keep them going for a long time. And so it's very cool. And then, I think we've talked about a little bit as we've gone along, but I mean, it seems like, we're constantly adjusting, but from whether we're delivering analytics, every hour to every day to every week, but it seems like we're slowly developing. We're finding different reasons for each one. It's not duplicated, but it's always the trap of you don't want to just provide a lot of data because then it's not useful. There's a ton of data out there, but is there good analysis? And it seems like that's what both our team and your teams working together are figuring out what's the important data and at what time periods are they important to make the best judgments. I mean, what are you guys seeing as far as the ability to the quick reaction stuff versus the kind of the long-term decision making?
Yeah, I mean, I think the community management team every day is looking at their data and their insights, and that's helping to drive, what am I going to do this week or next week? Or let's say they're planning next week. I'm trying to get ahead of long lead planning. It's a big area of focus. But so I think taking that data and applying it to what are our plans, what are our objectives, what are we trying to do. So I think that piece is really important. They need to own it, as Kat would always say. They need to own their data, right? So we need them to really understand it, look at it, analyze it, live it, breathe it every day. Executives want data too. And so we certainly have a way that we communicate with our leadership team.
3 words or less usually.
Big font. Short email, big font. But so we have that, and so I think that's an important piece as well. Everyone wants a scorecard. How are we doing? What are the key insights? And so that's more of a weekly type basis. And then
I was trying to invent like a mood ring. That was like the executive summary. So all they have to do is put the ring on, and they get kind of a color. And I thought maybe that would be. Could work? No?
Look into that.
All right.
Yeah, and then I'd say there's the partner needs, right? And so as we partner closely with either the media team or our brand team, what do they need? And that could be different. So I think, I don't know that there's necessarily a specific way that we go about, thinking about analytics and sharing that out. Certainly there's some process, but I just think for us, it's really about living it every day. And we're always planning, so we don't just work on one game, as you guys can imagine. EA is a big company, so we'll be in the tactics and execution mode for one game. Another one, we're thinking about how are we going to reacquire. So we've been quiet for a while. We're about to relaunch a game or announce a game or something. What's the strategy there? So I think that's why I love this job so much. It's so dynamic. When you think about so many games that you work on, think about the consumer journey, right? So we got to build awareness and then go through consideration, assessment. And then how do we gauge interest and so get some conversions around a demo or something like that, and then do purchase. And so you think about that consumer journey, and especially in HD console games, it could be like 8 months, right? So we've got to be really kind of creative and also disciplined about the way we approach it. So I think it plays in at all different points in kind of the campaign.
So I mean, this sort of analytics and kind of sort of overview as we're kind of getting through some of this. I mean, so. How is this different now with, with the team that we brought on operating 24 hours a day, having multiple people kind of on keyboard and really being able to, really constantly feel the pulse and then report that up. How does that differ from kind of how you guys had to do it, in last year or the year before, and what's. And there's always pluses and minuses, but how's it changed, and how does it affect you day to day?
Yeah, so I think the scale is really important, and certainly having your team, helping on the day to day allows our team to really be thinking about the plans, and not that you guys aren't also helping to shape strategy and what have you, but it really frees up. And again, it's a different person. I mean, I think. Our team is probably 100%, there's probably a couple people from a year ago.
Sure.
So it's different people doing different types of roles. I think that's really the most important thing is empowering them to do the performance-based type of community work. So allowing you guys to do the hands-on keyboards. I think scaling is a big piece of it. We're able to get smarter, faster. We're able to respond to fires really fast. I mean, something that we see come up, it could take minutes versus days. I mean, literally it would be days before we would have the right messaging and respond and try to put that fire out. And so I think we've just become nimble, we've become smarter, more flexible, just again allowing us to scale over more product. So before we'd have to make those trade-offs. Okay, what products get an investment of this depth in community? The biggest one. Just like the whatever is big that year, or whatever's launching right now. And so this has really empowered us to be, again, just more deliberate and thoughtful about our business. And I do believe it impacts the whole business. It impacts the efficiency of our media investment. It impacts the quality of feedback we give on videos, for example. I mean, we have community managers who will look and analyze the feedback of a video and make sure that marketing knows, next time, don't do that. They don't like it. They fall off. They stop watching. So I really believe it has positive impact on every single piece of our business.
And especially for you guys, that community manager level of person is, I mean, they're incredibly bright, dynamic people. A little crazy occasionally,
Gotta be crazy. I mean, I think we're all a little bit crazy.
But
this industry.
But the ideas they come up with, I mean, are amazing. So I mean, I can only imagine when, and I've certainly seen it. I know lots of people who've had this role in the past and have it at other publishers and developers now who are trying to, okay, while I'm eating breakfast, I'm going to try to respond to the community, and while I'm having lunch, and then I'm going to try to go to my meetings during the day, and then somewhere in the middle, I'm going to try to respond to the community, and okay, at midnight before I go to bed, trying to do that, and it's this roller coaster of, I think the strategy got done, 70% of what they wanted it to do, and the community engagement, got done 10% of what they wanted it to, and I think that's one of the things that's really been nice, is be able to balance that and find, we're wasting less money because we have the information, which then helps pay for the effort.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think it's about the investment and then your trade-offs always, right? So I think for us, we probably have the ability, the luxury of making less trade-offs
Right.
than we would otherwise.
And hopefully we're being smart about helping, like you said, those smaller titles that normally wouldn't get that kind of investment, because you can leverage it and go across channels, and because everybody has different launch windows, or at least we hope so. We don't like to stack too many of them at the same time.
Yep. And a 200,000 person community could be a really effective community, right? So just because it's small doesn't mean it's not good.
Some of those are the most engaged communities, and it's amazing what they can accomplish. Awesome.
Anything else you wanted to cover that we don't have on our slides?
No, I think that was it. I'm going to give everybody else a chance to go and see what they thought.
So you talked about community, and early on about maybe 2 years ago, maybe it doesn't sound like for some, but it was always thought about as crisis management, right? We got to, because someone said, this sucks, or fuck you, or they're hazing someone else,
yeah.
right? It's a negative thing, right? It's perceived.
Actually, fuck you's a good thing if it's a shooter.
Yeah. And there's negative perceptions. And I have a follow-up question here, but so first, maybe can you speak directly more about what is the process maybe you guys go through when it comes to the community, when it comes to the management of just that high red alert negative component? Is it paralysis that just maybe goes away, or is it head on? Like, what's a good practice to use for a lot of people that probably have different challenges?
So I think first it starts with a plan. So plan for the worst. Don't plan for the best. Seriously, plan for the worst. Shit's gonna break. People are gonna come to your office with guns, and try and break in. I mean, BioWare, yeah, or was that something I heard about when, you guys had to have extra security. So plan for the worst, and I think we did a really great job of kind of together figuring out what does that look like, what is that plan, and then we just optimize it every time. The good thing is the worst gets better over time. I think so. Planning is a big piece of it, and then head on certainly. And we try to work really fast. So there's always an escalation. There's always a group of people that are kind of the decision makers that we can readily go to if we need to get approval on new messaging. It's something we didn't expect happened, or we just need to make sure everyone's in the loop that this is how we're going to respond to something. So it's always head on. It's again, be authentic, be human. And there are going to be times when people just aren't happy. And so, it's not sorry, it's what are we doing? And I think one thing for Battlefield, which I think we would all say was a good job, is we might not have had all the answers at that moment, but it was letting people know we're working on it. And so kind of drip feeding along the way. So it's not just complete silence.
It seems like as soon as they
until
realized
you're
it
ready.
wasn't a bot saying we're working on it, they'd ask a few other questions, and they're like, oh, this is a real human. You really just answered my question. It seemed it got people to hold on during the bad times.
Sometimes we don't have an answer, but we're working on it. And I think so head on, and be authentic, and plan.
You respond within a day you're working on it, or within?
I mean, hours,
Oh, yeah.
minutes. I mean, it just really depends on how hot things are, but our pulse is real time.
We certainly saw things where, at some point, it was amazing the amount of exposure that we got to be able to get cell phones ringing very quickly.
Yeah. So plan. Plan for the words.
Oh, here comes they're going to try to get the microphone to everybody when you ask questions, because they're videotaping today, and if you don't have the microphone, they can't hear the question.
Hi, so you said you're developing these really strong relationships with your community, and you mentioned that there was a cross promotion that you mentioned in there, and that failed miserably. Did you retarget the community with that message in a different way? And I'm just curious how you can use that to your advantage. You now have probably the strongest relationship you're ever going to have with a consumer. How can you use it to your advantage beyond crisis management?
Yeah, so I think in that particular instance, there was a couple of communications, and so just watching it over time led to some very clear results that the community really didn't want that product. It wasn't a good fit for them. So we can get real-time information, and there might be instances where you just immediately like, let's adjust this. But it could be, did we present it the wrong way? Did we not connect with them in a certain piece of that game would resonate better, and we didn't find that? And so I think that's what part of that feedback loop is. And so we got some feedback, we're like, okay, let's maybe reframe it a little differently, try again. And then when that one didn't go so well, I think it was pretty clear that this particular title just wasn't a good fit for this community, which is fine, that happens.
That doesn't work. You have been able to cross-sell
Yes.
other things successfully.
Absolutely, and it was just laughing because literally an email that I sent out this morning was, hey team, this is our process, right? And we've learned this over the last several months about cross-promoting. We're gonna do A, B, and C. These are our rules of engagement for our friends across the whole company. And the first one is, what's in it for the consumer? Is this going to resonate and be compelling? And if it's not, then we walk away immediately. And then from there, like, how do we find that connection point that's gonna resonate? And we might not get it right the first time. We might try it a couple times, but I think after the second time, you probably know if you're just way off and you should stop talking about that game.
Yeah, that was we thought this was the right audience. It's not.
Well, I don't think it was the right audience for anyone, so it's fine. Just one of those games. Can't win them all.
Okay. I had a comment and a question both. First of all, just want to applaud you guys as EA for for really investing in your community. We have a lot of publishers that are still using the old model of, here's one community manager, here we're gonna make him talk throughout every single title we have and whatnot. So my question was there an epiphany at EA that said, hey, we're gonna spend this budget, take this money out of our marketing and whatever else it was, and invest it back into our community and make sure that we become the Nordstroms of communities, right? Like, we want to be known that we're gonna hear our consumers and we're gonna talk to them, and it's not gonna be a recording, it's not gonna be an FAQs, it's gonna be real time. And because how do we get our clients to think like that? How do we get them to think it's worth the money?
How do you get to that tipping point where it's valuable?
It's a good question. And it wasn't necessarily epiphany. And I'd say crawl, walk, run is an analogy that we use a lot. And so I think part of it is we need to prove it out, and you prove it out with not a lot. So we didn't immediately be able to work with Keith and his team. It was having a vision, a little bit of stars aligning that the leadership team believed in that vision and was willing to say, yes, we'll make a small investment here for you guys to go and work on this kind of new way of moving forward. Because it wasn't that we didn't have community managers before, it's just they were doing different things, right? So it's an evolution. And then it's crawl, walk, run, and then it's some baby steps and making some small investments and then just building from there. And even today, we have to make trade-offs, right? We'd love to do ABC, do more of this, but the business might need something somewhere else. So a lot of educating, a lot of we're patient, we are open, we're trying to educate, be good partners, because it's new for everyone. But I think a little bit for us, the stars aligned a little bit with some great vision and leadership saying, yeah, let's take a shot at it, and then proving it out.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Uh-oh. No, don't. Oh.
Yeah,
There we go.
this question's for Keith, actually. I was curious, what was most challenging about scaling to EA's vision and needs and quirks and all of that good stuff?
So what was the
What was the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge was to get this one particular young lady to trust me that we can only do it so fast. The biggest challenge was maintaining quality. Absolutely. Like I talked about, everyone on the team is a core gamer. And if the lightest people on the team, gaming-wise, were sometimes my strongest folks, social media-wise. They had the most community management experience, or they were already existing social media personalities. They really had pretty big Twitter followings, but they weren't quite as big gamers. And others were really big gamers, really understood. For us, the first one was Battlefield. they were huge Battlefield and first-person shooter players, but they didn't know, they knew forums well, but didn't know Facebook and Twitter well. So we had to constantly watch that quality and find ways to make sure that the team we had wouldn't fail us, because it wasn't worth it. And never was a point we knew that it would take one mistake of having the wrong kind of person on the team that could destroy your guy's brand. And that was critical. And obviously your patience in letting us build it and believing that that statement of we've got to do quality first. And it meant we had people working, I think somebody had an 87-hour time card during some of those, more than one person.
That's familiar.
At some points it was work more because we had less people, but the quality was so, and we were very fortunate.
I always comment Rebecca is a saint because she had the, what was it,
Oh,
9
the
p.m. to 4 a.m. shift. So the reports were
No,
coming
she
in
had
at 4 a.m.
she did 4 a.m. to
No.
9 p.m.
Okay. So we had reports coming in at like 4 a.m. and I was just like, well, how did you do that? She's like, I changed my entire life, just shifted. And I was like, that's amazing.
Yeah, I did. I ran late. I made it to about 2 a.m. every day.
Could have been
and
at
then,
9. I couldn't have worked for you.
And then, and then she'd pick up around 3:30 or 4 o'clock. So we had a small gap that there were a couple of Europeans helping out
Yeah.
to make sure in those days. But that was definitely the tough part.
Yeah, and you mentioned Europe, and one of the things we didn't really touch on, but
Of the
this is
international-
global, right? So the work that we do, and communities are all over the world, lots of different languages. So part of also just the investment and the trade-offs, right? What languages, what countries,
Yeah.
what type of investment,
But making
what
sure,
channels,
but these are global initiatives, and you can't.
global brands.
And we started. I think we started at 8 hours a day, and it
8 hours a
quickly
day,
it
5
became
days a week.
16, and then it was 7 days, and it was 16 hours, and it was like, well, there really is much more community in every time zone than we really ever anticipated, and it became 24.
Yeah, what's great is the data can help us
Yeah.
drive those decisions, right? Is that a good return on
yeah,
investment?
we knew
to have
exactly
people in
what
Europe
the
hours
flows
or
were.
whatever?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So obviously, social moderation has come a long way, or it's making a lot of progress, and a lot of that is the interaction between the community and moderators. And as this community grows tighter, do you feel that this will become an important component of how consumers view a brand, publisher or developer? And will that be an important component in their loyalty towards certain brands? The ones who give them the greatest feeling of a shared community.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I want to fly Virgin all the time just because I know that the community aspect and the social. So I think, and somebody had mentioned earlier, I don't know if it was a question or a speaker, but just about the affinity of brand. Like, we all want to belong. We belong to lots of things. We have our social circle
Sure.
among those things that we belong to. So I think absolutely, like, being a part of something is probably part of people's decision set. I might not play, whatever multiplayer game online because it's 12-year-old, douchebag kids that I want to play with. That's part of my decision-making set to even be part of that community, let alone play that game. So I absolutely think it's important, and that's why I think that nurturing, be human, be authentic is so important. And then how do we turn they already have the voice, but how do we really, make sure that they know that we know that they have the platform, they have the voice, and give them those kind of tools. And we ask lots of questions. We want to have them be a part of it.
Because they have a lot of choices. There's a lot of
A lot of
games that they have
choices.
a lot of games that they could play, and if they're not catered to and understood and listened to, they'll go somewhere until they find one that
Yeah,
is.
and we know we have a lot of people in various communities that can't even play our games because when you look at where they're from, we don't sell there. They're not buying, console $60 products, but they're still part of our community, and some of them, can be highly engaged, and so that adds a whole nother set of questions about how do we actually reach them and monetize them, right? And so, but if we have them as part of our community today, maybe 2-3 years from now,
Yep.
we're thinking about strategies for, MENA and how we're going to nurture that, Arabic-speaking community that we have, as an example.
I know that region in Australia, and I mean, it bubbles up, audiences that are untapped because of other issues that then it becomes an opportunity to be a priority.
Right. But we don't want to talk. We don't want to not talk to them.
Yes.
But it does also make it really important to try to get to that point where we're converting, really focusing on conversions. And so we got lots of tricks up our sleeve this year. Which I can't talk about.
definitely
No
got a question.
secrets.
What's your take on kind of putting a face to the community managers that are responding to people, or is it the brand? There's also certain people in the industry like Cliffy B, there's Robert Bowling, and then there's also some brands that don't have that kind of face. Sometimes we use producers. So just what's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably depends on the values of that brand. So I know, some of our brands, there are big personalities that are part of those, and whether that's development or community managers, and for other, like I don't know who on Virgin talks back to me when I let them know that I'm not happy with something on Twitter, but that's okay with me. So I think it really comes down to what the brand, tenets and values are. And I would say even probably within EA, we have different communities, might have a different face and a look and feel, certainly, than others, but we still work across all of them. So I think if it's going to be an asset and if it's going to be something you can invest in, could be interesting. If it's not a very sexy personality to begin with, maybe not such a good idea. But yes, I don't think you have to have it. I think it's opportunistic for sure, and it does come back to that idea though of the investment. And people change. People take other jobs. People move on to different brands or what have you. So I think there is also that kind of making sure that it's not too much about a certain personality if you're in that situation where people are going to eventually move on.
Some of the IPs, it's about what's the repetition of that IP? Can it be sustained over time? You certainly don't want to set expectations and then let the community down later on because you can't maintain it.
Yeah, and I think it's that brand personality, right? So all of our brands have different personalities. So what we try to do, we've got some tools or guides or what have you that people really know how to embody that personality and that voice and tone. So it doesn't matter if it's Keith or I, it's going to sound like Battlefield, for example.
Can you talk about the
Can
relationship?
somebody translate for him? I really.
Thanks, Keith. Can you talk about how you manage the needs of the developer and the needs of the publisher in social media? Because I'm assuming most developers have a community manager of someone. And what is the process to managing that?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the game. So not everybody's going to have none of our dev teams really have a community manager. Sometimes they have embedded community managers within that studio. If there's a certain studio culture that we want to make sure comes to life. It also just helps get stuff done when you have people that are connected closely to the studio. So I think a lot of our studios, at least that I work with, are really passionate about social as a platform. And I think they're thinking through some of the things that some of our other speakers were talking about, which is what's the gameplay? What's the right connections for the social platforms from a game standpoint? So we certainly work very closely with them on that, shaping maybe what those connections might look like, so it's not spammy, so it's interesting, it's engaging, it's innovative if we can, certainly. And then community tools is a big one. So for Need for Speed, for example, a lot of photos, or even Battlefield has UGC, right, user-generated content, videos that people come up with. So if we can create a place for people to share those things, that's part of our community tools. And so we work with our development teams on those investments that we make and make sure that that becomes part of our social strategy, so it will come to life on social platforms. So I think there's lots of different ways we connect with the development teams, but I think for the most part, these are the teams I've worked with, they are super passionate about social and the space, but they're trying to figure out what's their voice, what's their kind of special sauce to bring to their particular product and the consumers. And that's where we work really closely with them on what that is.
And for us, that's helped us a lot too. You guys have always been really open about letting key members of my team be part of that, because then they can carry it home to the rest of the team. Because the more personal interaction, the more we hear about that, the easier it is for us to go and speak in that voice as well. It's one thing to get the Google Docs that we use to track issues and responses, but then to really be able to talk to Daniel and Ian and Drew and all these different people who are so embedded into it that everything they say is in that voice. The more time the downstream people on keyboard get to really get to know them personally, the more that comes through, I think, in every response they make.
Yeah, and I think what we're trying to do is make sure our community managers that you guys are working close with are really tight with development teams.
Yep.
And so there's always been that us versus them, and yes, we technically fall under marketing, but really we're partnered across the organization with everyone. So I think from our standpoint, we're really closely with development teams. And then in terms of, I think your other question was about publishers, and I would just kind of revert back to the other comment, which is, again, we work really closely with all the teams, and hopefully we're doing a good job of sharing those insights that we're seeing that will empower those teams to make good decisions as well, in whatever part of the business they're driving.
Anyone else? Oh. Last one.
So, obviously, the community is kind of a subset of your players, and then even the vocal and really active community people are a subset of that. How accurate is the community kind of as a sample size or as a litmus test to who we're trying to market to as a whole, and how do you kind of temper that, on a game like Guitar Hero, right? We're working on Guitar Hero. If we would have listened to some of our most active community people, we would have developed just a game that had super hardcore death metal in it, right? So
Absolutely.
how do you temper that, versus saying, okay, this is probably just a few, very vocal minority when we're talking about development, and then even the marketing. You mentioned like adjusting a trailer for the community, right? So how do you balance that?
Yeah, so we definitely are sensitive to the vocal minority. I think we've been doing this a long time, right? So we all know that there's a few, and they talk really loudly, and most of the time they are painful, but they're giving you those, giving you those insights, so we need to take them. But I think that's where also being able to scale and not just look at our own channels, but the other channels that are talking about us, and really kind of pull all of that.
It's kind of where the
those
tools have gotten
conversations.
better.
Yeah, the tools. I mean, yeah, you guys have a whole host of tools, and so do we. So I think it's pulling all of it together. So I think that's what's really important about not overreacting to a small sample size or a vocal sample size. But then there's other things we do as well, right? So I think our brand partners are certainly doing a lot of consumer insights on brand health, or what do the consumers want? So we are a data point, and that's why we need to make sure we're partnering really closely with the other teams, is because they will have data points as well that will help make good decisions. So yeah, we're definitely sensitive to the vocal minority, but I think we have a lot of ways of getting good insights.
And I think it's another place where having a more consistent social channel commitment has helped, because I think over a couple of years ago, where the social channels were a small percentage and probably just the vocal minority, where, like for Battlefield, for instance, when you look at the numbers, we're nearly at our channel size is nearly 45% of the total unit sales. It's now it's a representative size of the sample. So then when we look at the data, we make sure, one, it's not 1%. It's loud, but it's only 1% of even the channel size. But we can look at it, and we know how big our audience is, and how big versus sales and adoption rates, and be able to know, is this real information, or is this just a blip in the radar?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you a bunch, everybody.
Thanks.